Welcome to Who We Remember. I'm Jamie Younger, the founder of StoryKeep and your host for this podcast. In each episode, I ask my guests a profound question. Whose life story from your own family would you most want to have documented on film? My guests share stories of both living and deceased family members, revealing their remarkable lives and the things that have shaped their own lives. This show is an extension of our mission at StoryKeep, where we partner with families of wealth to preserve their histories through legacy films and private podcasts. Since 2010, we've had the privilege of working with over 100 families, capturing their unique narratives for future generations. In this podcast, I engage in meaningful conversations with fascinating people, exploring the surprising histories and significant stories of their loved ones. By delving into their particular histories, we often uncover universal themes that resonate with all of us. We often wait too long to capture the stories of those that we love. Through these conversations, we elevate, honor, and celebrate the enduring influence of one person's life. My hope is that you'll leave each episode inspired to think more deeply about your own story and the legacy that you want to create. Today, I'm thrilled to welcome Thayne Knight to the show. I first met Jake about a year ago when I learned about Enclave, a community that he co-founded to bring together members of the rising generation, talking about the passions and their purposes that they want to pursue. I'm excited to have Jake here to share the story of his grandfather, Thayne Knight. Before we dive into Thayne's story, let me introduce you to Jake. Jake was driven by a passion for authentic connections and diverse experiences, and today he leads Enclave, a curated community for rising Gen peers. He is committed to meaningful relationships, personal growth, and spreading kindness. Jake grew up in Utah in an environment that was very intense and sometimes confusing, with his father founding and taking a company public during his formative years. Despite those challenges, Jake's sensitivity and adaptability have shaped the person that he is today. Now, let's dive into the story of Jake's grandfather, Thayne Knight, and explore the legacy that he's left behind. So, Jake, it is my pleasure to sit with you for a while and learn your answer to this question of our podcast, which is, whose life story from your own family would you want to have documented on film? And I don't know if that person came to you right away when we prompted you with a question or if it took you time to think about it. But please share with us who that person is.
Yeah. Well, first of all, thanks for having me on, Jamie. And it did come to me right away. The individual who came to mind was my grandpa Knight. Thayne Knight was his name, and he jumped straight into my mind when I got your note. You know, I think I got the best version of my grandpa because he had spent a good amount of time with me in my younger years, probably even before I remember. He was just at a later stage of his life that allowed him to do that. And then I would have, as long as I can remember, so maybe, when I was 4, 5, 6 years old, my grandparents moved from Utah, where they had lived most of their lives, to Phoenix to be closer to our family, as well as my cousin's family who were in Southern Cal. And so they were literally 15-minute drive away for most of my youth and teenage years.
So talk to me about your grandfather and what you remember of him and why he stands out as the person that you would want to have documented his stories.
Yeah, Grandpa was such a kind, fun, loving, gentle man. And he really showed up. Like that's the feeling I always got was that Grandpa was there. Whether that was having us over for dinner or coming to my sports activities, or coming over on holidays. He was just generally around, and he was very present. Like he just loved being around our family, around people, and then he loved to serve. So he was always, helping cook on the grill and gathering trash and making sure everyone had a great time. And so those things I think always drew him in to me, or me into him. The other thing that I think I hadn't connected these dots, but my other grandpa had passed away when I was in fifth grade. Yeah, when I was in fifth grade. And so that kind of put the light on my Grandpa Knight, that he was really my only grandpa that I was regularly engaged with.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And what of his life story, what sort of moments, memories, or life, events in his life would you want to record, like about his upbringing? I think you mentioned one thing in advance of this conversation that really struck me, is that when he was younger, his brother, if I'm not mistaken, drowned. And I don't know if you know some of the details of that story and what happened there. But I assume that would be one of the things that you would want to ask him about.
Yeah, for sure. He never talked about it. And it was really beautiful for me to hear. It's certainly a heartbreaking story. And yet I would have loved to be able to talk to my grandpa about the impact that had on him. And we never did. And so I really wish that would have been a conversation we could have had.
Yeah. There's so many things in family history that either we learn too late to have asked, or we learn, but somehow it doesn't feel like we can, or it's the right timing. And the impact of it sort of has its ripple effects in ways that we don't know. And then we're sitting here in this kind of conversation realizing, wait a second, that was pretty big. Do you have other parts of his life story that you know about that you would have wanted to have documented?
I think, he didn't share much about his life story, right? He just kind of kept things tight to the chest, which maybe that was protective, knowing now that there were some really difficult, painful, informative things that happened that he didn't want to talk about. But would have also enjoyed learning his dad. So would have been my great grandpa. I hear stories about him. His name's Horace, and he was a total character. And the few stories that I have heard, it's he definitely just was unique and an individual in a small town with an interesting personality. So I would have loved to hear more about his experience growing up in that environment, and what his childhood and kind of formative years, even going into his 20s and 30s, as he kind of found my grandma and started his family, like really those years would have been enjoyable to hear more about.
And what did your grandmother do for work?
Yeah, he from what I understand, most of his career, he sold equipment, like worked for an equipment sells tractors, farm equipment, and I think he did that for a long period of time. And then when he moved to Arizona, he was retired, and went to work for my dad when he started his trucking company, and continued to work 4 days a week until his doctors basically said, "Hey, you can't go to work anymore. It's not safe to drive." He was dealing with a degenerative brain disease, and so when that happened, I remember, we had a party for him, and he was celebrated. Everybody, by that point, the company was very large, and everyone just loved my grandpa, and so it was a really kind of a sad moment, because he thoroughly enjoyed working and helping others, and teaching, teaching the younger generation the value of a penny, right? Which is different than sometimes how the younger generation thinks. So I'm also grateful I got some of that experience, hearing some of those work stories, and experiencing it. Like I remember he would he would watch cost like no one else. And there's a story when my dad was working on taking the company public, where there were some investment bankers in town at the yard, and this is trucking, right? So there's trucks and trailers and shops and equipment everywhere. And my grandpa, the investment bankers asked my dad, like, what's that guy doing over there? And my grandpa had a big cement block, concrete poured block that he would connect to the forklift, and he would use that to stomp the garbage down, so that the garbage didn't have to come as often to save money, right? And he's out there moving
garbage.
What's that?
He's compressing the garbage.
He was compressing the garbage to ensure that the money was well spent, right? And my dad tells the story of the investment banker saying, "Well, if that's your dad, then we're in," right? Like if that's how you think about costs and how you think about stretching a dollar, then we want to put our dollars to work here. And that was just my grandpa. He would be out, yelling at the younger kids working in the shop, because what happens when you get new trucks, they come with basically no fuel, right, from the manufacturers. And when you give them back, he found that people were giving them back to the manufacturer when we would trade them with tanks full of fuel. And he would say, "Hey, if they're going to deliver them without fuel, they're going to get them back without fuel." And so he would go out and he would suck fuel out of these trucks to give them back the same exact way that we got him. And it seemed so minor, but those were like the little details that if you spread that over years and years, over thousands and thousands of trucks, like the amount of money that was saved, or cost savings, would have been massive. And that was just my grandpa. He didn't do it for the recognition. He just did it because he felt like it was right, and it was fair, and it was what was best for the company.
Yeah. You wanted that fuel back. Makes sense. So I'm curious, your dad ended up starting a trucking company, and as you've shared, it became very successful. It went public, and it's very interesting to me that when you were prompted this question, that you didn't immediately say, I would like to document my dad or my parents' life stories, who obviously have a tale, as we all do. And so I'm really curious what characteristics your grandfather exhibit that you want to or do live out in your own life that aren't necessarily, it seems, attached to, innovation and being a business owner, but are about something else. And you've kind of talked about it a bit, but I'm curious, what have you drawn close and you are trying to exhibit yourself?
Yeah, great question. Yeah, I think, for my parents, I'm a very curious person, and they're still young and alive. And so I think I've been able to learn a lot of their story and ask a lot of questions. And I would say, which I think happens generationally, my parents are probably more open than my grandpa would have ever been, just like I'm probably more open than my parents, and I see my kids demonstrating that as well. So I think I got, there's many qualities from both, but I think the through line from my grandpa, and probably why he comes top of mind for me, is my grandpa was at a much later stage of his life when I got to experience him. And so, like, the Knights, we're a pretty intense group, and he gets that from his father, and my dad gets that from my grandpa, and I get that from my dad, and I think, we've progressively, hopefully, been able to.
Wait, I have to break in. When you say intense, what do you mean? That is very interpretable, Jake.
Yeah, I mean, I would say intense is the right word. I would say passionate is another word. And if it's intense about positivity or storytelling or loving people, it comes through that way. If it's intense about being upset about something or angry or feeling stress, it comes through that way as well. And so it's a bittersweet characteristic, right? It serves and has served us all well in so many great ways, and yet there can be a shadow to that. And I would say, I probably received some of the shadow in my upbringing through the intensity of starting a business, taking a business public. As I got older, and started doing my own business ventures, like it really have helped me have more perspective and empathy for my dad, and the pressures of building business, growing business, dealing with extreme challenges, while also building a family, trying to take care of yourself, trying to stay healthy, all of those things. And so with my grandpa, like, his career was over. His intensity was never, I never really felt his intensity in a negative way. And so I think that was one of the qualities that felt good to me as it related to my grandfather. You know, other characteristics that he demonstrated. I mean, service, hard work. He loved to work hard and to help. And really, I think at a deeper level is about serving others and being genuinely helpful. And I remember a story. Our family has a background, a Mormon religion background, and some family members are still practicing. Others have left, and I left many years ago. And this is probably another piece I would have liked to ask my grandpa about, because he was never a churchgoer. And being in a really small, predominantly Mormon community, now I look at that and I'm like, that's fascinating. How did that work? And there's a great story about, you know, the other members of his ward, which is kind of the local area, would check in on him periodically and you know, try and see if he was interested in coming to church. And my grandpa, he would just say something to the effect of, hey, you're not going to find me at church, but if you ever need the building painted or the lawn mowed or something needs to be fixed, like I'm your guy. And that he didn't have any animosity, right? He wasn't throwing people out. He was super, super kind. But that was how my grandpa was. And so I think serving others, being thoughtful towards others. I do this funny thing on Christmas that for sure comes from him. It's like, as soon as the wrapping paper is getting tossed into a pile, I'm picking it up. And that comes from my grandpa, right? Like that way, he was just there like cleaning up as things went along. Or you know, my kids will tease me because I turn the lights out in the house, not to the same degree he does. He was quite intense about turning the lights out, but just if nobody's in a room or whatever, the lights get flipped off, and those are little funny demonstrations of just kind of who my grandpa was, and the time he grew up in, and the way he lived his life.
Mm-hmm. So I know you probably have your hands in many pots, but one of the pots that I know about is having formed Enclave recently with a co-founder, and that you are creating a space for next gen, rising gen folks to meet and get to know each other. And I'm curious if you have enough perspective for yourself of any qualities that your grandfather had that you feel like you're trying to purposefully live out in your leadership there with Enclave.
Yeah, you know, I don't know that there's any one. I think what we're building is unique, and it requires a lot of hard work, right? And building something from scratch that isn't just a better version of some other product or service that's already in the market is quite challenging. And so I think I can see the hard work, the perseverance qualities for sure showing up as we continue to build and grow and iterate within Enclave. I would say the other thing, and I haven't really touched on it, my grandpa, and I can see the through line here as well. My grandpa was relational. and cared deeply, even though a lot of probably his earlier business, his jobs and things, right? You think of sales, can tend to be transactional. I have to believe he made those transactions in a very relational way, and that's what made him successful. And so I think that for sure is showing up a lot right now, of like the importance of relation, especially building Enclave, which is really all about relationship, sharing of experiences, learning to ask questions to peers that maybe you haven't posed to others. And so the relational aspect I've really had to lean into, and I think that's a quality that that stems from him.
Mm. Mm. Yeah, I can see that. In closing, and I know we could talk for a lot longer, because this is, you know, he had this whole big life. But in closing, I was wondering if you had the chance to speak with him again, being older and wiser and in a different place in your life now, what you would want to say to him. And you are allowed to ask a question. If that is your last comment to him, it could be a question. But if there's something you would want to say to him.
Ooh, that's a big one. I'll be emotional. I don't think I have a question. It would more be just letting him know the positive impact he had on me, and my appreciation for him, and my appreciation for how he showed up, the qualities he demonstrated, and what he stood for, and the beautiful life he led.
Mm. Mm. We're gonna beam it out to him. I think he got the message. And it's been a real pleasure learning about your grandfather, and also more about you, Jake, through the stories of him. So thank you for sharing Grandpa Knight with us.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Jamie, for creating the space and allowing me the opportunity to reconnect with stories and feelings and thoughts of my grandpa, and I really appreciate you doing this work.